On this program, we've spoken quite a bit about Donald Trump's history of controversies when it comes to race. If you want a quick recap of some of the most racially tinged episodes, here goes. Remember this? Right after the Charlottesville protests last August.
You had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either.
Fine people, he says, on both sides. One of the sides, anti-Semites, white supremacists, and since then, Trump has done many things to anger minority communities. He said Haiti and African nations are, quote, S-hole countries. Trump also said he didn't want more immigrants from there. He'd prefer more people from Norway. You read the meaning. Doesn't take a genius to figure out Norway practically all white, those other countries not. Trump has also gotten criticized for personal attacks on prominent African Americans. This tweet, just a twofer. Quote, LeBron James just interviewed by the dumbest man on television, Don Lemon. He made LeBron look smart, which isn't easy to do. I like Mike. And listen to what he recently said about Congresswoman Maxine Waters, the Democrat from California.
I said it the other day, yes, she is a low IQ individual, Maxine Waters. I said it the other day. I mean, honestly, she's somewhere in the mid-60s, I believe that.
Then there's the national anthem protesters relating to the NFL. Trump has called them SOBs, said they should leave the country, and a lot more. By the way, it was started by African Americans protesting racial injustice. I could go on. Trump recently met with inner city pastors to discuss prison reform, an issue disproportionately affecting African American in that community. Now, an opinion piece in the Journal News discussed that. I'm going to read a portion of it. The biggest problem is not the preachers at the table, nor is it the preachers who criticize the preachers for being at the table. The problem is the lack of prophetic leadership to demand a clear agenda from the Trump administration, galvanize other pastors and social justice advocates, and push for that agenda until it's accomplished. Well, Reverend Edward Mulraine, he penned that piece. He's pastor at the United Baptist Tabernacle in Mount Vernon. He's also author of The 10-Step Man. He's kind enough to join us now. Reverend, thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Before I get to your piece, and there's a portion I want to get to in it.
Right.
I saw a poll recently. In fact, I talked about it on the show.
Right.
Or a plurality, albeit by a small margin, but a plurality of Americans think the President of the United States is racist. Now, given the power that that accusation holds and the weight of that meaning, if you were called and asked to respond to the same poll question, what would you say?
I would say that you have to look at the actions, and you have to look at the insults, and you have to look at the history of his remarks, and you just played a clip that basically says that, yes, he's a racist. When I looked at the piece and I said the African-American pastors that he met with, one of them said that he will be the most pro-black president this generation has seen, and he's in dispute and totally away from the majority of African Americans that see him criticizing mostly the intelligence of black people. What he said about Maxine Waters, what he says about Colin Kaepernick, what he says about LeBron James, what he says about Don Lemon, all of that is an attack on the intelligence of African Americans. And if you know anything about the intelligence of African Americans and the history of this country, it's always been that they low IQ, they can't compete in a nation, they're not up to standards with certain academic abilities in this nation, and it's all been racist statements from the past that he's bringing into the present to make it popular, and that only results in a president that sounds racist.
So Sunday, after services, before services, take me behind the doors here and tell me what you're hearing and contrast it to what you heard 3 years ago, and how in the last 2 years, since the President Trump came on the national consciousness and certainly has become president, how things have changed. What are you hearing?
How the things have changed since he's
mean
become
the
president?
tenor of the people. Were people skeptical what was going to happen? Where are they now? Are you sense of getting angrier? Are they getting scared? Are they getting frustrated? What do you hear?
I hear and I see people who knew that this would be a damaging and hostile administration. He was him during the campaign. He was him some years ago when he called out the Central Park Five and called them wilding and beasts and stuff like that. He was him all the time. And I think that when we came into the election, and now that we are in his administration, I think that people who knew Trump from his rhetoric during the campaign and him now know that it would be a hostile environment, which it is. But I think that a lot of people behind the scenes, a lot of people on top of the scenes, a lot of people in church are really angry at what they're seeing right now.
So you think
and believe that something needs to be done.
Than they even expected, or did they expect it would be this?
Worse than they expected, only because he has the power now to do a whole lot that he wouldn't have had to do while he was just campaigning or while he was just a businessman.
The question is, what do we do about it, and who should be doing the talking? And in the piece here, you talk about in the arc of history, you know, Frederick Douglass didn't ask, but he demanded that Lincoln end slavery. I want you to read another portion of it, because you talked about, obviously, in the civil rights era, that there was a prominent voice that spoke.
I wrote here, I said, where's the demand to challenge the powers that be today? Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King emerged out of the context of segregation and discrimination to challenge Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. King knew that segregation was an evil of the nation and marched until legislation was passed. Even after befriending Johnson and getting the Civil Rights Act passed, King continued to demand a Voting Rights Act as well. When Johnson rejected King's demand, King took to the streets and galvanized other pastors and social justice advocates. What was denied became a major legislative achievement.
So, Reverend, I've had this conversation every year on MLK Day. I'm joined at the table by prominent African Americans from different disciplines.
Yes.
And many people thought, after King, in some ways, Reverend Jackson took up the mantle.
Right.
To mixed results compared to, obviously, Dr. King.
Right.
And then Sharpton emerged on the scene. And obviously, I'm skipping some names here, but in an abbreviated form. But some people think it's a mistake to have a hope that one voice will speak for an entire race here and be able to galvanize that race.
Right.
Do you understand that, or do you think that there is a voice out there that could really champion, not only, you know, muster up the people to protest and speak in one voice? Is that possible?
Let me just say it like this in two ways. Number one, there's never been just one voice. When Martin Luther King was around, there was SCLC around, Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was around, John Farmers was around. They had a whole lot of voices.
Obviously, the different voice.
Absolutely, different voices coming in different ways and different streams. And Black Panthers emerged even after that. So you do have different voices coming at different times. But this is what makes the difference. And even today, if you're going to have one voice that's prominent in terms of the opposition and oppression, why can't there be one voice also that merges all those other voices together and even stands out amongst those other voices that are anti-oppressive and challenge the administration? And I think that's what you had in the past. Although you had a diverse group of voices that wanted to challenge Johnson, you still had one. Remember, the March on Washington was not just Martin Luther King. You had this unions and everybody else coming together in order to challenge. But you had one voice emerge out of those voices to say that was the strongest voice in order to affect the administration. And even after that, King decided to continue in his marching. Today, the same thing. I think you can have diverse voices. And I think that we need to get together and all the multiple voices and really allow one voice to emerge out of that can penetrate. And it's not that Trump has to be cooperative. Prophetic voices are not working with cooperative people. If anything, they're working with uncooperative people. But the problem with prophetic leadership today, we have marches, but it's for a day. There's no consistency. And when you don't have consistency, how can you penetrate and affect an administration?
And as I always say, the impact of the ballot box. You got midterms coming up here. If they have a fear of a turnout here, that fear will be taken more seriously. Reverend, really interesting piece. We linked it to our program as well here. I appreciate you coming in.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
And be sure to get the book and talk about the book as well.
There we go. And coming up next, we're going to switch gears to a happy story, a sister act. Sister Mary Jo throwing out a first pitch to Remember, and she's getting rave reviews. I know most of these things don't go anywhere near the catcher. Trust me, not this one. So good, you got an offer from the manager of the White Sox, and as bad as they are this year, they probably need it. You're going to want to stick around for this story. It's coming up next.